History's biggest monsters aren't just the guys with the highest scores on the kill board. Sometimes they're the ones with the wildest, sickest imaginations. We're diving into the profiles of 33 creeps who weren't just killers. They were pioneers of panic, architects of agony. From a doctor who turned into a walking biological weapon to a queen who handed out poison like it was candy. These stories prove that reality is way scarier than any horror movie script. 1. Edward Teach, aka Blackbeard. Believe it or not, this guy wasn't actually the most violent pirate out there. He probably killed fewer people than his buddies. No, Blackbeard was the original marketing genius. He knew that freaking people out was worth way more cash than gold. His whole brand was psychological warfare. Before a fight, he'd take hemp fuses soaked in chemicals, weave them into his beard, and literally set his face on fire. He'd walk out onto the enemy deck surrounded by smoke, strapped with a dozen pistols, looking like a literal demon clocking in for a shift. His enemies weren't just fighting a pirate. They were looking at a supernatural nightmare. The special effects were so good, most crews just surrendered without firing a single shot. Pretty smart, right? Before we get to the next psycho, smash that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. 2. Phalaris of Syracuse. This ancient Greek tyrant decided cruelty needed to be an art form. A really messed up art form. He commissioned a life-sized hollow bronze bull. It wasn't a statue for the garden, it was an oven. He'd lock victims. Inside, light a fire underneath and slow roast them. But here's the sickest part. The bull had a sound system designed by a mad genius. The head had tubes inside that converted the person's screaming into the sound of an angry bull mooing. It was basically a symphony of torture, turning someone's death into a matinee show for the tyrant's entertainment. Talk about a bad audience. 3. Back in the 16th century, when everyone was terrified of the devil, Peter Neers was the guy fueling Germany's nightmares. He looked like a regular bandit, but after some persuasion, he confessed to 544 murders. That number sounds fake, but the details were what really freaked people out. He claimed he was a black magic wizard who targeted pregnant women to use fetuses for dark rituals. Legend says this gave him powers like invisibility. He was basically the real-life boogeyman, blurring the line between a dirty criminal and a supernatural monster running on pure nightmare fuel. 4. Meet Vera Renci, the Romanian Black Widow of the 1920s. She took the idea of keeping keepsakes to a gross new level. She was this fancy aristocrat with a string of husbands, lovers, and even a son who all just disappeared. Poof. When the cops, I finally checked her wine cellar, they didn't find vintage vino. They found 35 zinc coffins lined up perfectly. Inside each one, a dead ex. Vera wasn't just killing, she was collecting. She'd sit in a chair down there and chat with the corpses like it was tea time. It was the ultimate possessive girlfriend move, making sure her men could literally never leave her. 5. Next door in Hungary, a tinsmith named Bela Kiss was running a similar operation but way more industrial. When World War I started, Kiss went off to fight, leaving behind his house and these giant metal drums. Years later, when town officials cracked them open, they expected gasoline. Nope. They found the pickled bodies of at least 24 young women. Kiss had been luring women over, strangling them, and pickling them in alcohol inside his homemade drums. And the kicker, he was never caught. He built his own personal museum of horrors and then just ghosted history completely. 6. H. Holmes. America's first celebrity serial killer and a literal architect of death. For the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, he built a hotel people called the Murder Castle. And yeah, accurate name. This 3-story maze was built specifically to slaughter people, filled with soundproof rooms, secret hallways, and trapdoors. He even rigged gas lines to choke out guests in their sleep. He installed laundry chutes that dropped bodies straight to the basement, which had surgical tables and a crematorium to get rid of the evidence. It was basically an industrial murder factory where the building itself was the weapon. 7. Harold Shipman, aka Dr. Death. This guy is terrifying because he totally betrayed everyone. He was this nice family doctor in a small English town, the type you trust with your life. And he used that trust to become one of the biggest serial killers ever. Over decades, Shipman killed at least 250 patients, mostly older ladies using lethal injections. Then he'd fake their medical records and forge their wills to steal their cash. It was evil hiding in plain sight, twisting a sacred relationship. The monster wasn't lurking in an alley, he was knocking on your front door. 8. In the chaos of 1920s Germany, one name freaked out an entire city. Peter Kürten, the vampire of Dusseldorf. This guy went on a rampage of assaults and murders with zero pattern, just absolute terror. His victims ranged from kids to adults, attacked with all kinds of weapons. But he got his nickname for the grossest reason possible. He would sometimes drink the blood right from their wounds. Kürten was basically a walking breakdown of society, a monster on the streets whose random savagery made everyone feel like they were next. His crimes were like a dark mirror of how messed up the times were. 9. In the Soviet Union, crime supposedly didn't exist. Enter Andrei Chikatilo, a system glitch so horrific he broke the whole narrative. For 12 years, the Butcher of Rostov lurked around train stations, looking like everybody's harmless grandpa, a total nobody that people just ignored. This boring camouflage was his superpower. While the cops wearing their ideological blinders hunted for some young buff supervillain, convinced that Western-style perversion was impossible for a good Soviet citizen, Chikatilo kept on killing. He tricked at least 52 women and kids into their graves with a savagery that rattled even the most hardened detectives. His habit of slicing and dining wasn't just murder. It was like he was trying to erase the definition of human. Chikatilo is the poster child for a special kind of nightmare, the monster that thrives because the government is too stubborn to admit he exists. Number 10. Pedro Alonso Lopez, the monster of the Andes, put up stats that look less like a crime spree and more like an act of God. Even he sounded bored when he confessed, claiming he took out over 300 young girls across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. He was basically a walking plague, drifting between towns and taking advantage of poor, trusting locals. But the real brain-melting part isn't just the body count. It's the sequel. Thanks to a legal system held together by duct tape, he only did 18 years behind bars. In 1994, one of the deadliest predators ever was stamped, fixed, and kicked out onto the street. He walked off into the sunset and vanished, so now we all get to sleep soundly, wondering where the human black hole is hanging out. Number 11. Ted Bundy was the ultimate nightmare fuel because he was a living Trojan horse. Before him, folks comforted themselves thinking creeps looked like creeps. Bundy took a sledgehammer to that idea. He was hot, smart, good with words, and a law student. The type of guy you'd high-five your daughter for bringing home to dinner. He weaponized that all-American sparkle, faking a broken arm with a sling or playing cop to lull victims into a false sense of safety. His wickedness wasn't just the violence, it was the Oscar-worthy acting job. Bundy proved the scariest wolf isn't the one hiding in the bushes, but the one grinning at you in the grocery store, making you paranoid about trusting anyone ever again. Number 12. Jack the Ripper is way more than just a vintage killer. He's the MVP of our collective spookfest. He didn't just off women. In the foggy, maze-like back alleys of Victorian London, he turned the whole city into his personal, gory art gallery. The absolute surgical precision of his cuts had people panic guessing he was a top-tier doctor, or maybe even royalty gone rogue. But it was the mind games, those taunting letters to the papers signed with his creepy nickname, that made him a legend. He was never snagged, never unmasked. He's still the faceless icon of city terror, the smart plotting and totally ghostly evil that can pop out of a crowd, do unspeakable stuff, and then dissolve back into the mist like he was never there. Number 13. The wildest thing about Charles Manson is that he didn't even need to lift a finger to become a history book villain. His mojo was way creepier. Amid the lost and found vibe of the late 60s, Manson played the dark guru, scooping up confused kids into a cult he dubbed the Family. He was a wizard of head games, mixing drugs, charisma, and some bonkers prophecy about a race war called Helter Skelter, to basically delete their personalities and reboot them as his personal puppets. He proved a terrifying point, a charismatic. Enough psycho doesn't need to get bloody. He just has to whisper, nudge, and warp other people until they turn into living, breathing assault rifles. Number 14. In the cutthroat New York mob scene where guys got whacked over nothing, Roy DeMeo and his squad were so scary efficient that even other hitmen whispered about them like boogeymen. DeMeo wasn't just a killer, he was the Henry Ford of murder. He perfected the Gemini method, a grimly practical assembly line for making folks vanish. Victims got tricked into the Gemini lounge, popped quickly, and then dragged to a special room where a crew would chop them up in hours, leaving zero evidence. No passion, no rage, just cold. Industrial-grade human disposal. The DeMeo crew was terrifying because they offered total erasure, turning a human being into a couple of trash bags with chilling corporate professionalism. Number 15. Dr. Shiro Ishii is basically the bottom of the barrel for science ethics. A guy who took the noble quest for smarts and turned it into a weapon for unimaginable cruelty. Running Japan's Unit 731 during World War II, he was the boss of a slaughterhouse dressed up as a lab. Inside, thousands of prisoners who his staff dehumanized by calling them logs were cut open while still awake and feeling everything. Purposely sickened with the plague and used as target practice for flamethrowers. The ending of this story will make you want to scream. Ishii never saw a jail cell. The U.S. gave him and his top geeks a get-out-of-jail-free card in exchange for their nasty research. Notes: the architect of hell on earth got to retire and die of old age. Number 16. Ivan the Terrible, Russia's first Tsar, is the classic example of a genius brain curdling into psycho-paranoia. He started off strong, then nosedived into the Oprichnina, an era of government-approved horror. He built a private squad of goth-looking goons, the Oprichniki, who galloped around with severed dog heads and brooms on their saddles, subtle metaphors for sniffing out and sweeping away. Treason. They only listened to Ivan unleashing a tsunami of executions, including the savage destruction of the entire city of Novgorod. The cherry on top of his tyrant sundae was totally personal. In a moment of pure, unhinged fury, he lashed out and killed his own son, basically canceling Russia's future with the same hands that built the empire. Number 17. Queen Ranavalona, the first of Madagascar. They called her the Mad Queen, but her paranoia started from a logical place. She really didn't want European colonizers taking over. But her strategy spiraled into a 33-year nightmare of self-sabotage. She saw spies everywhere. Her favorite HR technique for weeding them out, the Tangina ordeal. She made people eat a poisonous nut and 3 bits of chicken skin. If they puked up, all 3 pieces. Congrats, you're innocent. If you didn't, or the poison killed you, guilty. This psycho logic, combined with brutal forced labor, wrecked her population. She tried so hard to save Madagascar from outsiders that she wiped out half her own people, becoming a way bigger monster than the ones she was scared of. Number 18. Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge weren't just killers. They tried to hit the factory reset button on humanity. It is hard to even wrap your head around. When they took Cambodia in 1975, they called it Year Zero. Not a metaphor. They emptied the cities at gunpoint, marching millions into the jungle to build a twisted farming fantasy. But the only thing they harvested was death. They deleted society. Families were split up, religion was banned, and being smart was a death sentence. Wearing glasses or speaking a second language got you executed for being a dangerous nerd. The killing fields were the result, where over 1 million folks were beaten to death just to save bullets. Pol Pot's vibe was the ultimate bad idea, thinking you can build a heaven by turning the present into a giant cemetery. Number 19. King Leopold II of Belgium proves you don't need politics to be evil, just greed. He scam artist Ed the world into thinking he was helping Africa, grabbing a massive chunk of land he called the Congo Free State. Spoiler, it wasn't free. It was his private backyard, and he ran it like a mega prison the size of Western Europe. His goon squad, the Force Publique, terrorized locals to get rubber and ivory. It was pure nightmare fuel. Every village had a rubber quota, and if they missed it, they'd kidnap the women or chop off children's hands as a receipt. Leopold, chilling in his fancy palace in Brussels, became super rich by running a meat grinder that took out an estimated 10 to 15 million souls. His brand of evil was just cold corporate paperwork, where people were nothing but numbers in red ink. Number 20. Nader Shah, the 18th century Persian boss, was a military genius who started from the bottom. But more power meant more paranoia, and his brilliant brain turned into a swamp of cruelty. The Delhi invasion shows just how far he fell. After a few of his lizzing, guys got killed in a riot. Nader threw a tantrum and ordered a massacre. 30,000 people left dead in the riot. Streets in a single day. He got personal with it too. He thought his own son was plotting against him, so he blinded the kid and then killed the nobles who felt sorry for him because he thought pity was for wimps. Nader is the classic example of a leader imploding. A guy so consumed by fear that his own officers eventually had to stab him in his tent just to end the madness. Number 21. Timur, or Tamerlane if you're nasty, was a 14th century warlord who didn't just beat you. He turned your bones into Legos. He loved psychological horror. If a city said no to him, he didn't just burn it down. He made art projects out of the corpses. His signature move: building towers out of skulls. After crushing, it's a revolt in Isfahan, he built over 24 towers using 70,000 heads, a skyline of death, telling the world to back off. Once he buried 4,000 soldiers alive. It wasn't just war, it was performance art, with a body count making sure his name meant runaway forever. Number 22. Attila the Hun. Less of a king, more like a hurricane with a pulse. He rolled through 5th century Europe, leaving nothing but dust. They called him the Scourge of God for a reason. He and his crew were all about destruction. They didn't want to build or govern. They just wanted to loot and delete. They burned cities so hard that legend says, grass quit growing there. To the dying Roman Empire, Attila was basically the apocalypse, in human form. A scary outsider who only wanted gold and wreckage. He is history's ultimate wrecking ball, leaving behind nothing but smoke and trauma. Number 23. Muammar Gaddafi was a special flavor of crazy mixing brutal dictatorship with the drama of a reality TV star. For 42 years, he ran Libya with fear and a weird cult vibe. His cruelty was primetime entertainment. He put hangings on TV so everyone had to watch state-sponsored murder during dinner. He kept an all-female bodyguard squad and gave speeches so long and nutty they left the world confused and his people terrified of whatever wild impulse hit him next. Gaddafi wasn't just scary, he was dangerously unstable. Imagine a tinfoil hat paranoid with absolute power, who saw enemies in his soup and ran the country like a chaotic personal prison, holding millions of people in a psychological headlock for over 4 decades. Number 24. The nightmare of Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet was a corporate bureaucratic style of evil but just as chilling. After grabbing the wheel in a 1973 coup, his Nada-Saven-Rax administration mastered the dark art of making enemies vanish into thin air. He didn't always make martyrs with big public shows. Instead, his secret police would just snatch political rivals off the curb and drag them to hidden dungeons. Poof, gone forever. His notorious caravans of death were basically military, hit squads that hopped from jail to jail, liquidating dissidents. Experts guess they tossed thousands of bodies out of helicopters straight into the Pacific Ocean. It was psychological warfare on steroids. It wasn't just about killing the opposition. It was about hitting delete on human beings leaving, their families stuck in a horrific gray zone of never knowing the truth, a wound that stays fresh forever. Number 25. Saddam Hussein's grip on Iraq was, for the textbook definition of modern terror, a regime built on a bedrock of pure panic. He kept the lights on not just with a massive army, but with a snitch network so deep it turned neighbors into spies. But his absolute worst moment was a shocking level up in cruelty using chemical nukes on his own citizens. The 1988 Halabja attack wasn't a battle. It was a straight-up massacre. He dumped a cocktail of mustard gas and nerve agents on a Kurdish town, wiping out an estimated 5,000 civilians before lunch. People dropped dead on the pavement in their living rooms, frozen like statues in their final seconds. Saddam's brand of terror was the ultimate stab in the back. A boss who looked at his own people and saw nothing but pests to be bug-bombed whenever they got annoying. Number 26. François Duvalier, or Papa Doc to his friends and victims, was the boss of Haiti. But he acted less like a president and more like a voodoo sorcerer. He hacked the culture's deep belief in voodoo and twisted it into a weapon for mind control. He literally cosplayed as Baron Samedi, the spirit of death, talking in a creepy nasal drone and never taking off his sunglasses. This spooky persona was backed up by the very real violence of his private goon squad, the Tauntaun Makut. Named after a folklore boogeyman, they were a force of pure nightmare fuel responsible for torturing and murdering tens of thousands. They only listened to Papa Doc, and honestly, plenty of people thought they were actual demons. Papa Doc's genius was mixing government brutality with supernatural dread, keeping everyone paralyzed by fear of both the police and the ghosts. Number 27. Queen Mary I of England earned the heavy metal nickname Bloody Mary, and she worked hard for it. Her brand of terror was religious extremism backed by the army. Desperate to drag England back to the Catholic club, she launched a purge against Protestants that gave the whole country PTSD. Her favorite move was lighting people on fire in public. Nearly 300 folks, from top-tier bishops to random nobodies, got labeled heretics and roasted alive. These weren't quiet backroom deals. They were gruesome shows meant to terrify anyone thinking about disagreeing with the Queen's Church. Mary's timeline is a grim lesson on what happens when a ruler's personal faith goes toxic and turns the whole map into a bonfire of panic. Number 28. In an era of religious hype, Tomás de Torquemada was the CEO of organized terror. As the first boss of the Spanish Inquisition, he wasn't just a guy. He was the operator of a machine built to scrub the faith clean using paranoia and agony. Under his 15-year watch, the Inquisition turned into a shadow monster haunting every street in Spain. Just one anonymous tip was enough to get you thrown in a hole. Torquemada turned torture into a science not for fun, but because he genuinely thought hurting you saved your soul. He was the reason thousands burned at the stake and hundreds of thousands of Jews and Muslims were kicked out of the country. His evil was the cold, paperwork-heavy type from a fanatic who thought he was doing the Lord's dirty work one stretched rack at a time. Number 29. Cesare Borgia was the scary poster child for the Renaissance's sketchy side, a time when ambition meant having zero morals. As the illegitimate kid of Pope Alexander VI, he had the guts and the holy nepo baby status to carve out a slice of Italy through betrayal, violence, and fear. He loved a quiet hit, usually preferring the clean efficiency of a spiked drink via his famous poison stash or a knife in the dark. Rumor has it he even offed his own brother to secure the bag. And he was so ruthlessly practical that he became the main muse for Machiavelli's amoral guidebook, The Prince. Borgia's vibe was the sophisticated, chilling evil of a predator in fancy clothes. A guy who saw human lives as just game pieces in his massive power play. Number 30. While most Renaissance nobles were savage, Sigismondo Pandolfo Malatesta, the Wolf of Rimini, was playing a different game entirely. He was a guy of such aggressive wickedness that people back then honestly thought he was a demon in a skin suit, a genius general and an apparition. Art lover. His public face hid a private life so twisted it grossed out even 15th century Italians. The rap sheet against him included every sin in the book: killing 2 wives, assaulting his daughter, and robbing churches. His evil was such a legend that Pope Pius II did something wild and held a ceremony to officially pre-damn him to hell, back when he was still breathing. Malatesta is that 1 in a billion bad guy whose hobby list was so twisted it skipped right past crime and landed squarely in the territory of mythical supervillain. Number 31. Maximilien Robespierre kicked things off as the golden boy of the French Revolution, the guy everyone trusted. But talk about a villain arc. He became a walking red flag, proving that trying too hard to be virtuous can end in a total bloodbath. As the head honcho of the Committee of Public Safety, he basically invented the Reign of Terror, a fun little season where they celebrated freedom and equality by chopping everyone's heads off. The guy was so paranoid about spotting traitors that he built a whole vibe where snitching was mandatory and a single awkward comment was a one-way ticket to the afterlife. The terror chewed through tens of thousands of people, from fancy dukes to random bakers, in a wild spree of government-approved slaughter. Robespierre is the ultimate scary story of a strict idealist morphing into a monster. He was a guy who loved the idea of humanity so much that he didn't mind stacking actual human bodies like firewood to build his dream world. Number 32. Nathan Bedford Forrest. If there was a triple crown for American racial terror, this guy won it. He managed to be a nightmare in 3 different eras. Before the Civil War, he was a millionaire slave trader, stacking cash in the brutal market of buying and selling people. Then the war hits, and he becomes a smart but savage Confederate general notorious for the Fort Pillow Massacre. That time, his troops wiped out hundreds of Union soldiers who were trying to surrender, mostly black men. But his greatest hit dropped after the war. Because the idea of equality made him sick, he became the very first Grand Wizard of the KKK, using his army brain to organize what turned into the longest-running hate group in the country. Forrest wasn't just a cog in the machine. He was the engineer driving the train of hatred his whole life. An absolute giant of American horror. Number 33. And finally, we get to the guy whose middle name is literally a torture method, Vlad the Impaler. This 15th century prince of Wallachia wasn't just running a country, he was running a theater of horrors, and the battlefield was his stage. While other dictators were just mean, Vlad was basically the Picasso of pain, and his paintbrush was a giant sharp stick. Impalement is a uniquely nasty way to go a slow, agonizing drag that could take days while gravity did the dirty work. But for Vlad, it wasn't just about deleting his rivals. It was about leaving a Yelp review written in blood. His magnum opus was the legendary Forest of the Impaled, where he reportedly welcomed an enemy Ottoman army with a landscape of 20,000 prisoners stuck on poles. Just a miles-long rotting art installation of doom. The guy was such a legendary monster that his real-life resume inspired the biggest vampire story of all time, upgrading him from a historical creep to an immortal king of the undead. And that wraps up our little museum of nightmares. But hey, a list of 33 is barely scratching the surface. History is packed with the skeletons of psychos we haven't dug up yet. That is where you come in. Head down to the comments section and tell me which terrifying maniac we criminally forgot. I don't just want a name drop. Tell me exactly what made their brand of pass crazy so special. Let's crowdsource the ultimate encyclopedia of evil. If you think these stories deserve the spotlight, prove it by smashing that like button and subscribing. Because history doesn't stop at the answers, it stops at the questions that are still too scary to ask.